Now, this video is a four-part series. Three of the videos are about 10 minutes, with the last one being about 7 minutes on two of the most insane Conjure trials in South Carolina history. One taking place in 1887 and the other one taking place in 1889. Now, I think it's important to note that South Carolina considers the last official witch trial to be that of Barbara Powers, which took place earlier in the 19th century. But post emancipation, there were a lot of people, women specifically, who were put on trial for conjuring, although they did it under the guise of practicing medicine without a license. But this is that story I just want to share with you guys. So if you don't want to watch all four parts here, head over to my YouTube to view the entire video. On August 6, 1887, a 32-year-old African American woman named Jane Mahaffey walked into trial justice William B. Stoddard's house in the rural town of Lawrence, South Carolina. Citing a South Carolina criminal statute that forbade practicing medicine without a license, Mahaffey swore out a warrant against her neighbor, Sarah Evans, a 42-year-old freedwoman. Her incompetency to practice is proving her injurious to persons who have been under her treatment for several years. The warrant's affidavit declared, adding, the medicine so given by her is supposed to contain poisonous ingredients. Trial Justice Stoddard promptly appointed a special constable to arrest Sarah Evans. Within a few hours, the African American midwife and mother of 7 found herself lodged in the Lawrence County Jail to await her preliminary. Now, as the witness testimonies from her hearing revealed, Sarah Evans was a conjurer, and she was one of a class of medical practitioners whose healing practices stemmed from the African American diaspora and, of course, centuries of enslavement in North America. The court documents demonstrate that Evans treated a wide swath of African American patients for various physical complaints using herbal and ritual remedies. So, like other conjurers, she proposed to treat afflictions that her patients believed had been caused by spiritual forces or the ill will of enemies. And as a midwife, she also dealt with more mundane medical events. The witness testimonies demonstrated that Sarah Evans was a renowned figure in her own community whose medicinal knowledge and spiritual powers drew a large clientele of patients, including from the surrounding counties. Yet her rumored poisoning inspired fear as well as respect in her neighbors and led to her indictment in Lawrence County Criminal Court of General Sessions. Now, there, Evans found herself and her medical practices placed under scrutiny of her white and black neighbors, a half dozen of whom were former patients who testified against her. Go figure. All right, I'm back. So the goal of Sarah Evans's preliminary hearing was to determine whether Jane Mahaffrey's complaint should lead to her indictment for practicing medicine without a license and charging for the same thing. So, this law, South Carolina's recently enacted 1881 statute to regulate the licensing of physicians and surgeons, required that physicians be licensed, practice from a reputable medical school, and register with the clerk of county in which they practice. Failure to do so could result in a medical practitioner being convicted of a misdemeanor and fined between $50 and $200. Now, on subsequent violations, an offender could face imprisonment for up to 90 days and another fine. Half of these fines went into the county treasury and the other to the complainant who brought the unlicensed practitioner to the law. Now, in Evanson's case, this complainant was Jane Mahaffrey, another black woman. So, was she looking to make a quick buck? Now, Sarah Evans did not present any witnesses in her defense, whom she would later name and enlist as was customary in time for her to actually have her trial. So, if she made a statement during the hearing, that document has not survived. However, Her indictment, arrest warrant, and the witness testimony against her, taken down verbatim by a clerk and scrawled on yellow lined paper, have been preserved, of course. Jane Mahaffrey testified first, and Jane Mahaffrey characterized Sarah Evans as both a well known conjurer in Lawrence County's African American community and a rather notorious figure who was reportedly just as likely to poison or enact malevolent conjure against her patients' enemies as she was to prescribe root based medicine. Now, Jane described her experiences with Evans as a patient 2 years before that, and in the fall of 1885 being in bad health and Sarah Evans being recommended to her as a physician. Jane went to her to get medicine. So she actually used her services. The defendant told me I was poisoned, Jane explained. So if I were to give her some of my hair, urine, she would fix it so that the woman who had done the poisoning could not do it again. So Jane gave Evans a sample of her hair, urine, and by way of payment, $1.50 and 13 yards in cloth. Now, Sarah Evans evidently offered to fix it so that the person who poisoned Jane could no longer do so. She may have used the hair and urine she requested from Jane to make a powerful charm or a hand of protection. However, she could have also used Jane's hair and urine in divination practice to determine who it was that conjured something against Jane. This seems more likely because Jane testified that sometime after she gave Sarah Evans the hair and water, Evans came to her house and told her that Susan Campbell, a local black woman, had threatened my life. In any event, though, Evans claimed that she discovered, whether through supernatural ritual or simply the network of hearsay, that the woman who poisoned Jane and caused the pain in her limbs was indeed Susan Campbell. Now, having diagnosed the problem, Evans gave Jane Mahaffrey about a half gallon of medicine to relieve the pain in her limbs. And that's what Jane said. Although Jane did not describe the medicine, another witness later said that it contained snake bones and roots of some kind. And it was reported that, and Jane said that it did not relieve her. And she went back after she found out that the defendant did not give her the particular medicine that she promised. And at Sarah Evans's house, Jane accused the conjure woman of aiming to trick her by giving her the wrong medicine. In other words, attempting to poison her. But Evan asked Jane if she had emptied it out. She implied that her medicine, like any physician's treatment, took time to become effective. Jane testified that she continued taking the medicine, but rather than relieving her pain, it continued to make her ill. And subsequent conversations with Sarah Evans made her more suspicious of the conjure woman's motives. She says, and I quote, "I've taken some of the medicine in my mouth and it hurts my throat to this day." And that's what she told the courts. So, considering that Jane had received the medicine from Evans 2 years beforehand, she was saying she had been permanently affected. And during a later visit, Evans had evidently told Jane about a number of people that Evans poisoned. It was Mr. Andrews and his wife, Jane said, naming a white couple who had died in 1885. Evans claimed that she had gone in the nighttime and put poison in the Andrews well water. She had done so on behalf of a client, Frances Peace, probably a young black woman from nearby Greenville, South Carolina, who came to her to get her to unalive Andrews and his wife. Now, Sarah Evans performed the role of a conjure woman who can inspire both respect and fear. Now, she reportedly told Jane that she could put people out the way anytime that people wanted it done by using her medicine on them. She added that Susan Campbell, the same woman who she said had poisoned Jane or had work thrown against her, was in fact one of Evans's clients and had come to get her to poison Robert Coleman and his wife. Now, this revelation alarmed and further angered Jane, who probably drew the logical conclusion that Evans herself might have been the one who initially poisoned Jane, causing the pain in her legs on behalf of her client, Susan Campbell. Robert Coleman and his wife were still alive and well, but Evans evidently explained to Jane that she had so many cases that she hadn't had the time to attend to Mr. Coleman's case. In short, she said she had a waiting list of people she intended to unalive on behalf of clients. Jane testified that Evans also told her about unaliving Linda and Isha Gary in 1885. I hear a great many people say they're afraid of her, Jane concluded. I could have had plenty of witnesses if such had not been the case, because, people were afraid of her, so nobody wanted to. And at this point, can we blame them? Because Sarah Evans sounds literally insane. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, like, yo, if you're going around doing all of this, why are you running your mouth, ma'am? Hitmer Hafferty, Jane's 32-year-old husband, spoke up next. And although Jane's testimony makes the nature of Sarah Evans' poisoning and medicine somewhat ambiguous, Hitt definitively drew on the language of Conjure to characterize Evans' practices as both supernatural and material. Hitt told the court that he had known Evans to be practicing medicine about 14 years. Like his wife, had once gotten some medicine from her and she charged him for it. He paid $1.75 in money, 25 cents in flour, some sugar, and coffee. Evans clearly accepted payments of all kind as she had when Jane Mahaffey had partially paid her with cloth. Now, Hitt says she told me that I'd been poisoned or conjured. Hitt testified using the two words as synonyms and that she could cure poison and other tricks. He told the court that Evans, a root doctor and midwife, had been recommended to him as a physician. Yet, although she evidently came highly recommended, and he did not mention how her treatment affected him, Hitt agreed with his wife that Sarah Evans was a figure who could harm as well as heal. A great many people are afraid of her poisoning and playing tricks on them, he said. Another person, Henry Jackson, African American witness who testified that in 1886 he had paid Evans $7, which is a lot, for treating his wife for a bad case of an unspecified illness, and that the medicine she gave him contained snake bones. Now, he agreed with the Merhaffertys in this case. In fact, he implied that Evans regularly poisoned her patients. I've heard people say that she will poison and keep poisoning her patients in a lingering condition to make money on them, he testified. She's been accused of poisoning a great many colored people. The testimony of Fayette Dunlap, maybe it's supposed to be Lafayette, but Fayette Dunlap, yet another patient who testified against Evans, hints at why community members simultaneously believed that Evans was potentially dangerous, yet regularly went to her for cures. Dunlap, a black man who had received medicine from Evans, had known her for about 5 years. He testified that unnamed people had recommended her as a physician to help him when he was sick. Yet he testified, I was told by people that she might poison me if I didn't pay her. All right, so let's talk a little about Sarah Evans and her past. She was born in 1845 and she spent roughly the first 2 decades of her life in bondage. She may have begun learning the conjure tradition of healing and baneful harming during this time period. It's also suspected that she learned from an older female relative or possibly a mentor who taught her how to deliver children, preparing her for the occupation of midwife. She was likely a keen observer of roots and herbs conjurers gathered, which rituals and charms they incorporated into them, and which remedies proved successful for relieving pain and symptoms in. Now, although they are hostile sources, The witness testimonies for or from Sarah Evans's hearing paint a portrait of a woman whose skills were both respected and feared in her community. So clearly, she enjoyed the widespread reputation as a root doctor with a considerable knowledge of herbs and rituals. Now, adept in these performative aspects of her art, along with the roots and herbs, she offered a variety of healing and afflicting services according to her clients' needs, which is even common today. Also, to note that the census records suggest that Sarah Evans worked as a farm laborer alongside her husband, Cedric Evans, for about 8 years after emancipation. So she likely married Cedric while they were both enslaved, and since she gave birth to their first daughter, Harriet, in 1862. Now, in the years to come, she would have five more daughters and a son, and the family lived in Lawrence County, surrounded by in an African American community who all shared variations of the surname of the white man who once legally owned them, plantation master Matthew P. Evans. And just some more historical facts. Matthew P. Evans died in December 1861, and in his will, he requested that 210 acres of his land and his personal property, consisting of 20 Negroes, be sold. This included Cedric, Sarah Evans's husband. It's unclear whether Sarah herself was among the 20 people sold after Evans's death to one of the unnamed children. Now, by 1873, Sarah Evans had begun treating patients in Lawrence County's African American community using ritual and herbal conjure remedies. Now, while we can't know if she achieved any immediate success with patients or if this was something that was gradually built by her reputation, the 1880 census lists her occupation as keeping house. So this suggests that by 1880, the combined income Evans earned from her conjure practice and midwifery was enough to allow her to avoid paid domestic work and field labor. We can also speculate that Evans probably appreciated the flexibility of conjure work and midwifery, as they would have enabled her to better meet the demands of caring for her children. She was clearly well established as a conjurer, by 1887, the trial. So we are now at the point 1887. The Sarah Evans had achieved notoriety as a poisoner at this point. Actually, until the day she was indicted for practicing medicine without a license, she worked at least 14 years prior to that, healing people for a fee, of course. And it seemed that Sarah had inhabited the role of healer and poisoner with dexterity. So it's quite possible that she did continue to do so after the court case as well, despite the evidence that she did practice medicine and charge payment for her services. The jury in Evans's criminal trial acquitted her. As with most criminal records from the late 19th century in the South, of course, the documents do not explain the verdict or the jury's reasoning or the legal strategies that Sarah Evans or her defense attorney used. Notably, none of her statements in her own defense, if any were made, have been preserved, only the witness testimony against her. So, a possible explanation for the acquittal is that the jury, consisting of white male tenant farmers and farm laborers, may have actually been puzzled by the charges of poisoning and unaliving that Jane Mahaffey and the other witnesses laid against Evans in the first place. These grave and largely unsubstantiated accusations may have also served to place Evans in the jury's mind in the category other than that of practitioner of medicine. And this possibly is suggested by trial justice Stoddard's sarcastic dismissal of witnesses Henry Jackson's claim that Sarah Evans's famous medicine contained snake bones. Jackson admitted upon being cross-examined by the trial justice about Evans's prescriptions that I consider snakes bad medicine to cure disease. Now, here as elsewhere, the ambiguity of the conjurer's role could have worked in her favor with this white jury. She was a medical practitioner who treated patients for aches, pains, and illnesses, as well as, in the case midwife, of her being a midwife, tended to pregnant and postpartum women during and after childbirth. Yet the ritual elements of her practices made her difficult to categorize for these jurors. Claims of poisoning and murder that she herself said was to have originated could not be easily proven or disproven. In short, the luminal nature of Sarah Evans as a conjurer may have well contributed to her acquittal. In any event, people in the courtroom may not have been wholly surprised by the verdict in her favor because it was well known that the conjurer's powers did not falter at the courthouse steps. Some believed that chewing certain roots during court could ensure a defendant's acquittal. And while no one said that she was chewing anything, we know from the plenty of stories that I have given in the past that it doesn't take much to figure out what you need to chew in order to get out of a court case. Now, it's interesting to note that Barbara Powers is supposedly the last known witch trial in South Carolina. But in the case of Sarah Evans and this next person I'm going to detail, also a Black woman who is a conjurer, I would consider this a witch trial as well. And these both took place long after the trial of Barbara Powers. So I'm going to need South Carolina historians to put some respect on Sarah Evans and Amanda Watkins. So now let's get into the story of Amanda Watkins. So, in another case from Lawrence County, South Carolina, where Sarah Evans was tried in 1887, a white physician lodged an ultimately unsuccessful complaint against two conjure women, accusing them of poisoning. In February 1889, Dr. John Fowler swore out an arrest warrant on against Amanda Watkins and Sarah Henderson, an African American mother and her married daughter, for an attempt to unalive his family by poisoning. At the preliminary hearing, Fowler explained why he believed the Conjure women were responsible for a mysterious illness in his family. He testified that in June 1888 he had an altercation with Amanda Watkins, 45-year-old black woman who dealt in herbs and lived about 3 miles from him. During his argument, Fowler evidently accused Watkins of unaliving her children. And although he said he thought his harsh words did not make her mad at the time, at some point later on, Fowler evidently connected his confrontation with Amanda Watkins in late May with a mysterious illness which he claimed began to affect his family in June. And according to Fowler's testimony, his young children began showing signs of poisoning. Now, not long afterward, he said he heard a rumor that Amanda Watkins had been talking, as usual, about his family's predicament. And she allegedly told an acquaintance that Fowler had accused her of killing her children. Then she made chilling remarks. I wonder if he is killing his children or if God is killing them. Fowler said that this report aroused his suspicions, and he'd come to believe, as he testified, that Amanda Watkins and her daughter, Sarah Henderson, were responsible for his family's symptoms. Fowler asserted that Watkins had poisoned his well by means of some destructive thing. He entered the object allegedly found in his well into evidence during the preliminary hearing and described it as saying that it was tied up in a rag and looked as powders. The rags seemed to be made and tied, and the inner portion seemed to be colored yellow and a copperas color. The rags seemed to be along the lines of a trick bag, sometimes called a hand or a jack, a bundle containing roots and other ingredients, which was commonly used in conjure to fix or poison someone. So Dr. John Fowler, however, turned not to another conjurer as we saw in seeing some other stories, but to the law for assistance in seeking vengeance against Amanda Watkins and her daughter Sarah Henderson, who he and other witnesses believe were involved in the poisoning of his well. Constable who had arrested Sarah Henderson linked her to the case by testifying that he had seen some kind of wild weeds lying on her kitchen table. He identified one of the herbs as black rat's vein or pipsissewa, a diuretic which was used to ease kidney and bladder problems, but did not recognize the other. Now, apparently, the same herbs had been found at her mother, Amanda Watkins' house. John Fowler implied that the poison was in the trick bag found in his well, although the evidence was somewhat worn out by the time he presented it at the hearing. I consider her a dangerous person because of the roots and from my knowledge of her, Fowler said of Sarah Henderson. Now, Dr. Fowler was not the only physician who testified against Watkins and her daughter, Henderson, at the preliminary hearing. Because, of course, he had to get other white men to jump in on it too. So, Dr. Moses Clayton Cox, Dr. W.B. Burns, no relation to me, of course, and Dr. Thomas McCoy, three white physicians with respected professional reputations in the Lawrence County area, all swore that they believed the symptoms manifested by Fowler's family were consistent with corrosive or restringent poison, and that Watkins and Henderson were the source of were a source of danger, to the community's well-being. Possibly the four physicians had also heard rumors that the Conjure women offered herbal remedies for illnesses. Fowler's accusation that Watkins had unalived her children, could be interpreted as related to abortion, a service that Watkins and Henderson perhaps provided with their wild weeds. Now, John Fowler also could have meant that Amanda Watkins's use of her own medicine to treat her sick children rather than turning to an orthodox physician was unaliving them. In either case, he was well aware of the Conjure Woman's reputation and had been struck by her comment. I wonder if he is killing, unaliving his children, or is God unaliving them? Which he connected with the made and tied trick bag containing powders that he had found in his well. Other witnesses at the hearing also reported that Watkins had threatened them or spoken publicly about her poisoning abilities. Gertrude Madden, an 18-year-old black woman who lived near Watkins, testified at the preliminary hearing that she experienced a difficulty with Amanda during which the conjurer had frightened her. She said if she was like many women, she could get one drop of scorpion's blood and some kind of roots, put it in the bag, and put it in the bottom of the spring, and let me drink off of it, and it would unalive me. Madden said the threat closely resembled what Fowler claimed Watkins had done to his family and demonstrates once again that the role of the conjurer was a highly performative one that could involve frightening as well as healing members of the community. And I'd be like, first of all, little girl, you need to mind your business and stay out of this. Really, you see, y'all told you first trial all skin folk are not kinfolk because why are you up in this black woman's business? Did your people not teach you to respect your elders and mind your manners, ma'am? So, like I said, the that trial actually ended up with a dismissal, but because of course it was crazy, and like I said with Sarah Evans, if Miss Watkins and her daughter were indeed powerful conjure women, why do you think they would go to jail? Think about that. Now, other conjure practitioners in post emancipation South Carolina occasionally faced legal prosecution for helping women to induce abortions, for example, which by the late 19th century had become a criminal offense in the state and in much of the country. Julia Simmons and Lucretia Kane of rural Oconee County were sentenced to a combined 3 years in the state penitentiary in 1882 after they were found guilty of using destructive substances to attempt to induce a miscarriage. Court testimony reveals that Kane, a white widow, had turned to Julia Simmons, an African American neighbor, to procure a abortion for her teenage daughter, Lucy Kane. Simmons reportedly gave Lucy a tea containing a laundry list of herbal herbs to induce an abortion: black pepper, pecan root, cottonseed, bluestone, mistletoe, and hartshorn. Lucy, however, mentioned the abortion to a relative who swore out a warrant against the women. And in a 1894 case from Lawrence County, an African American practitioner named Eliza Vance was indicted, though not convicted, for unaliving after a young black woman died 4 weeks after Vance gave her a tea containing mistletoe and certain other things for the purpose of producing an abortion. But with the exception of the last two women who were solely arrested and tried on the assumption of producing an abortion, the first two, or the first three, Sarah Evans, Amanda Watkins, and Sarah Henderson, could both be seen as healers or afflictors, depending on who you talk to. And it's that reputation as a conjurer within the community that can keep you respected and also feared at the same time. So I know that this was a very long video. I want to thank you guys for keeping in there with me. But let me know what you think about this entire story in the comments.